My name's Rod Noble and I came to uni in the beginning of 1971. I had been travelling around the world. I was out of the steelworks in Newcastle as an apprentice and I'd finished my apprenticeship. I'd travelled the world quite a bit. Came in 1971. I was enrolled in history, sociology and philosophy. I was obviously very worried that my marble would be taken out and I'd have to go to war in Vietnam, and I didn't want to go to war in Vietnam. I didn't want to go and kill people I'd never met and had no reason to be angry with or call my enemies. Now, I was one of 60 apprentices and we all were talking about that a lot, obviously. I wasn't politically aware enough to go against the draft, like I wasn't prepared to resist the National Service Act and refuse to and all that sort of thing. But that changed very quickly when I got to university in 1971. And one of the key events that moved me to become politically aware was the anti-apartheid movement. And in that movement, we had a big teach-in. All of the lectures were cancelled with the support of the staff, and all of the staff got involved, and we had big teach-ins, and they were all over the whole campus. And I think about that time there were about 2,500 internal students then, a lot more external of course. And they went on day after day, that wasn't just one day. I was just amazed at that sort of thing, the discussions, the depth of the discussions and what information we got about the terrible situation in South Africa. And Nelson Mandela, of course, was one of the elements that was discussed. And don't forget, this is 1971. And so, yeah, we had big teach-ins and that got me on my political path and very interested in doing political action to change things. What led to the formation of the Socialist Action Movement, that was one of the elements that politicised many people, not just me, but in St Albert's College there was a number of people I had met and made friends with, and that included George Campbell and Bob Kavanagh, and we thought, and quite correctly as it turned out, that there really needed to be a movement that could be active, and it wasn't just then against apartheid, but it was also against the war in Vietnam and the environment, a whole range of issues, and therefore it needed to be a wider, not just a movement against apartheid, but it had to be a wider movement, and you could make it some sort of a capitalist movement or a socialist movement. That was the issues, and obviously at that time the capitalists wanted the war and socialists didn't. So it was quite easy really for us to decide we'll form a socialist movement on campus, a broad one, not a political, we didn't form a political party. It was a movement broadly, and we wanted to change society. That was at that moment. And the three of us that I mentioned, myself and George and Bob, we decided we'd gather some people around from other colleges and a few more within St Albert's and form the Socialist Action Movement, and with the emphasis on action. Probably because we formed it right towards the end of 1971, it was really beginning of 1972 that the Socialist Action Movement was actually officially launched, but we were absolutely correct in the sense that we sensed that this is what needed to be done, because the thing just took off and grew really rapidly. By 1973 we had 200 members, and that was with an internal student number of 2,500 people. So you can get the percentages there of people that flocked to the Socialist Action Movement. And there were some opposition groups, of course, that were very unhappy about our existence, but we had a mass following. In answer to your question about what I'd be most proud of, I think in 1972 and 73 we took part in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and we had big marches down the street. We supported the Black Moratorium for Aboriginal rights. All of these were big marches down Beatty Street to the main street of Armidale, and they attracted a lot of attention. And in 1973, again because we were a broad movement, we always had environmental things happening as well, but in 1973 we had an anti-exam campaign, and you think, oh gee, that's not in the same range of things as anti-Vietnam War or anti-apartheid or whatever. But it was very important because in those times, a lot of the courses, a lot of the programs had one exam at the end of the year. And if you didn't pass that exam, you couldn't go to them. And the stress on the students was unbelievable. And for us, it was very personal because we had some friends who tried to commit suicide. And we had one friend who actually succeeded in committing suicide, all of them around the exam time. And we had meetings about this in the Socialist Action Movement. We thought this has just got to change. So we organised what was called a peasants' revolt. And we marched up from the colleges with rakes and shovels and farming implements, let's call it that way, as peasants, and we surrounded Boolamimba, and we actually seized control of the building. We ended up with about 400 people outside teeming around, and about 200 got inside. That's as many as we could fit at that time. And then barricaded ourselves in for at least 2 days and resisted all attempts to regain the building. So we had the UNE administration building for a couple of days. Needless to say, that caused a great deal of publicity. It was in the Armidale Express and elsewhere. That made national news, actually. It was all over the country. And so the issue of the examinations then, we only left the building when we got guarantees from the deans and of the faculties and other high up people that they were very prepared to talk to us about the future of the nature of examinations, and we got guarantees that a more progressive assessment would take place and that less would depend on one single exam at the end of the year. And the following year, true to their word, a lot of discussions happened and the assessment changed radically. And we were reasonably happy with that because less attempted suicides. I'm not saying that all the attempted suicides were related exactly to the exams, but in our opinion a lot of them were, and certainly the successful suicide of a friend of ours, it certainly was, in our opinion anyway. Yeah. People have probably forgotten this, but in those days women were banned from public bars in all the pubs. And it wasn't just in Armidale, it was all over the place. But it was considered that men were a bit uncouth and they would be swearing. This is not the sort of thing that women should be around. That was the cultural thing of the time. So we had lots of female friends and girlfriends and so on, and we thought, this is crazy, they can't come in and have a drink with us. Well, so a team of us went into, I think it was the New England Hotel, one of the big ones anyway, in Beardy Street from memory, and we said to the publican, we drank there semi-regularly, and we said, look, if we want to bring our girlfriends in and our friends, our female friends, and if you don't allow them to drink with us, we won't drink here anymore. So we were quite regular customers, and he said, okay then. That was it. It was done. And from that moment on, as soon as he'd done that in one of the big local pubs, the others just had to match it. The band disappeared within a few weeks. I don't know about other towns or cities, but certainly in Armidale, I think there were still a few holdouts in amongst a couple of the pubs, but generally speaking, it spread fairly rapidly that the women were allowed into the public bars. I was a working class lad and I left school at 15 and I had to go to evening college to get high schools to get into entry to university. I ended up as a tutor at Wright College in my last year, and then I went back to Newcastle, got a job as a research officer in the trade unions, which was very natural because Newcastle and the Hunter Valley was a very strong militant union area. And I had the politics by then. I was quite left, what they would term left-wing, and which almost translated into very in favour of unions, although there were conservative unions too. And I worked as a research officer there for quite a long time, about a decade. But I had other jobs as well because that didn't pay too well. I had other jobs in between, and I was doing casual electrical work because that was my apprenticeship time, my trade. I was a caretaker of a facility for one stage. But, and then I got poached by the university. Well, let me put it this way. I got invited to apply for a job at the university at Newcastle because I'd been, by that stage, my research position had turned into workers' health and safety, and I was the coordinator of that, and amongst other things. And there was a position for a lecturer in occupational health and safety and industrial relations, which fitted me from 2 points of view. I got the job and I became a lecturer at the University of Newcastle. That was the very early 1990s. And I was there for 20 years, roughly. Yeah, look, I'm talking about whether I maintained the rage of my position on various things. The university courses that I was doing gave me certain perspectives on things, but What I expanded most of all was the time that I had to read widely and a lot of discussions with people. And I formed my views, put all the things together. My travel around the world, meeting lots of people, seeing different situations, having the chance to study in depth in the 5 years that I was around the university. Lots of time to do plenty of things and get a perspective on things. And I've kept that, and every time I've thought that there might have been something that I got wrong, I can modify things a bit, but generally speaking, the answer to that question is I think the perspectives that I developed were good ones, and they were ones that meant to make the world into a better place, to change society and make the world into a better place. I still believe that now, and those perspectives that I've got, and I'm still a socialist. I'm quite happy to call myself a socialist. The alternative is to call myself a capitalist, as far as I'm concerned. Even though there were times people were thinking, oh, capitalism's great because it's free enterprise that brings everything, all the good things. That's not true, and it never was. It's certainly a lot less true than it might have been. Yeah.